Homeless. I went back to the States and graduated from college, but didn't have a home to go back to. One weekend, when I was home visiting from college, my dad told us to hurry up and pack up our rooms, that the moving truck was coming and we were moving to our home in Florida. Once again, I was being uprooted and the rug pulled out from under my feet. I loved our home and community. I remember as I was packing a box, I just started throwing up. So after college, I went back home to Long Island and stayed with my aunt, the one who was my stepmother, for a few years. This lasted only a short while because this was when I met my daughter's father, Eugene. Leaving Brooklyn and in between homes, he had nowhere to stay, so he ended up on my aunt's couch. At first, she was very nice and accommodating, but after a couple of weeks, she couldn't handle that scenario, and I don't blame her. Off we went. We lived in my car for a while, surviving on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I had a tiny Ford Escort at the time. This was my first experience living out of my car. At 22 years old, everything is more like an adventure, not a burden, until I realized how cold and uncomfortable it really was, even with blankets. The romance was gone, but this challenge did prepare me for future experiences. We finally found an apartment, and after about a year of working miscellaneous jobs and dancing for entertainment companies on the weekend, I had enough. This was absurd, I thought. All that money and education, and this is what I'm doing with my life? So I decided I would get serious and get a real job. I called upon my friend from college who lived in Jersey City and asked him if I could stay with him for a few days while I went into Manhattan to pound the pavement. The purple plaid suit. I bought the New York Times, read through the Help Wanted section, and circled anything that looked promising. I put on my only suit and hit the streets. I was 23, and the limiting thoughts had not yet taken over my mind. I was fearless. Since cell phones had not yet been created, I walked around with an old-fashioned paper map and no idea where I was going. I had to actually talk to people and ask for directions. I went from one temp agency to another. I felt like I was selling myself short. After all, I graduated magna cum laude from a good private college, and agency after agency kept giving me typing tests and dictation tests. I did everything they asked, one after the other, all day long. Disheartened and about to call it quits, I walked into my last agency. The young man that interviewed me seemed to be more interested in me than the others. He confirmed that I spoke Spanish fluently, one of the benefits of living in Spain, and then asked me if I was good with numbers. I said, "I'm half Asian, of course I'm good with numbers," trying to break the ice, which he didn't find very amusing. He made a phone call, then asked me, "Can you go for an interview now?" "Of course," I replied. He proceeded to look me up and down and asked me if I had anything else to wear. Surprised at his question, I replied, "No." He told me it's not professional for women to wear pantsuits. I was wearing the only suit I owned, which Eugene's mother bought for me, so it was special. It was not just any pantsuit, but a fleece purple plaid pantsuit that we found in Brooklyn at one of those sidewalk shops hanging up outside. I thought I rocked it, but looking back now, it's one of those, "I can't believe I wore that" admissions. The woman who worked at the next desk overheard our conversation, walked over to me and said, "Come with me." We went into the ladies' room. She took off her black skirt and told me to give her my pants, which I did hesitantly. Then she told me there was a Woolworths around the block and to go buy a pair of stockings, which I did. I interviewed on the 84th floor of the World Trade Center and got the job. I returned to the temp agency and we switched clothes. I don't think I expressed enough gratitude to this angel who God placed in my life. I call this angel intervention, or AI. I was beginning to realize how serendipitous things flowed and how I was being watched over all the time, even though I always felt alone. I had no idea what a stock or a bond was, but was soon going to learn. I started as an administrative assistant and worked my way up to operations manager within a year. I am a quick learner. Getting that job was divine intervention because I found out I was pregnant. My boss, Paul, another angel in my life, helped me get health insurance so I would be covered for my pregnancy. He saved me big time. I was home on maternity leave when the first basement bomb went off in Tower 1 in 1993. Our office was ruined and we had to relocate to another building within the financial center. I went back to work 6 weeks after I gave birth. One of the toughest and most unnatural things to do was to leave my baby with strangers at a daycare center. The first one we found returned her smelling like cigarette smoke with a bruise on her forehead. Then we found another place with a woman who became my friend, and that is where she stayed until she started school. I found a new job at Merrill Lynch on Long Island, closer to home. I'm grateful that I left the city when I did. The discovery of self-help books. Even though the financial industry was the last career I ever wanted, there was a silver lining, ironically. This materialistic path led me to the world of personal growth. The first self-help books I was introduced to were by Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I found these books so interesting, I read all the rest of his books. I bought a cassette player for my car and listened to Zig Ziglar on cassette tapes driving to and from work. Even though at the time it was to increase my sales, it also motivated me and helped me to feel more positive. I was given the book The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino that left an impact on me and led me to his other books. The Greatest Miracle in the World brought me comfort and inspiration, which I gave to all the people in my life. These financial self-growth books led me to stumble across the book The Seed of the Soul by Gary Zukov. I read it even though I didn't really understand it. I intuitively knew these metaphysical concepts and spiritual ideas were important. A seed was planted. At the time, I had no idea how significant this was. During one of my bookstore outings, I discovered a significant book, You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. I only bought it because the cover was colorful and had pretty red hearts all over it. In the end, it changed my life and became my new Bible that I gave to all my friends. Although I didn't quite grasp these new Eastern concepts being raised in the West, something resonated with me. I bought the cassette tapes that went along with the book and played them at night while my daughter was sleeping. I learned it was one way to reprogram our subconscious mind. I didn't realize at the time that it wasn't her subconscious mind that needed reprogramming, but mine. Who knows, maybe that's why she turned out to be such a wonderful young woman now. At this point, my father had been incarcerated for about a year. It was my first time visiting someone in prison, and not really the scenario I imagined in my mind when I had my first child, and introducing my father to my future husband. We had planned to get married after Ayana was born initially. We were both nervous and intimidated, shielding and protecting our baby from the steel, cold, scary environment, not sure if this was the right thing to do. At least I knew my dad, dressed in all orange, couldn't say anything about Eugene being black. My father was an identical twin, which I used to get confused when I was a little girl. His brother, my uncle, came to the hospital when my daughter was born. It was as close to a father that I could get. I never got a straight story as to why my father went to jail and then had to flee the state of New York. I did read about my father in the newspaper shortly after. The story he told me did not match up with the story in the newspaper. No big surprise there. All I knew was we lost everything. Again, I had no one to depend on but myself. Since my father was banned from New York, he flew to Florida until we lost that house too. Then we lost all of our possessions, which were in a storage unit, and he ended up finding God and becoming a deacon of the church, ironically, facilitating Mass in prison. Perhaps it's true that the healthy way for adults to grow is that the first half of the life the focus is on material things, amassing wealth and security. Then the second half of life is about getting rid of it all and seeking deeper meaning. It's no surprise that my dad lost all his material possessions. After all, his affirmation every time we pulled the Porsche or Mercedes-Benz into the garage from an outing was, "Back home and broke." My father was obviously not up on metaphysical quantum physics, but he demonstrated perfectly how your thoughts create your reality. Your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits, Your habits become your values become your destiny. Mahatma Gandhi. It seemed my dad was on the fast track to spiritual maturity. He had amassed wealth, status, and material things, lost them all, including his identity, and recreated himself anew. Then he suffered a massive stroke and never recovered. He chose not to partake in physical therapy because, as he said, they don't know what they're doing. He might have found God, but he was still a stubborn arse and a drinking fool. His life became saturated with a poor me attitude and endless emails. He lost his ability to walk, so he was confined to a wheelchair, living at the computer in a room with a friend that was kind enough to take him in. Unfortunately or fortunately, my father took religion to the extreme. He became a radical born-again something, not sure what. He was always trying to shove Jesus down my throat. He would end every phone call or email with, "I hope you are taking Jesus into your heart, Peanut, or you will burn eternally in hell." I'm pretty sure Jesus didn't endorse that message. God forbid I mention Buddha or any other enlightened masters that walked the earth. That never went over well with him. God always takes care of his children. There were many angels looking over us. The man I was dating at the time Eugene committed suicide stayed in our lives. I never asked him to, and he certainly didn't have to. He was the first honest person who was straight up with me and didn't play games. He was the rock that we needed. He was and is still a blessing in our lives. There is always a silver lining. We just have to look for it.